Hi guys, I'm Dani Castellano, and this is Diet Culture. Today I interviewed a friend and fellow dietitian, Molly Bremer. Molly is a passionate registered dietitian who specializes in the treatment of eating disorders through an intuitive eating and health at every size lens. She realized her appreciation for individualized nutrition after she enrolled in a nutrition counseling course during college. As a natural people person, she revels in the opportunity to talk with others about their relationship to food. Her goal is to help her clients embrace their unique and deeply personal food journey in order to work together to forge a path that feels right for them. Molly and I talked about how nutrition is whitewashed, how becoming a dietitian is limited, personal and professional growth during COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement, how HAES and white supremacy do not align, self-care, the importance of cultural foods not being swapped out for health foods, and much more. Can't wait for you to check out the episode. Hi, Molly.
Hey, Dani. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right on this Tuesday evening.
Yes. So for the listeners, I interviewed Molly along with my friend Jenna, who did Fit Feel Free with me probably just about a year ago now, right around. And so I'm going to link that episode in the show notes so that you can go back and listen to that first conversation if you would like, because we really talked with Molly about how she got into the space of being anti-diet and a HAES dietitian, intuitive eating, all those really good things that we have in common. And today I really wanted to catch up with her about what kind of growth she's gone through and where her work is lying as we are, another year older and another year wiser.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. It's crazy. I feel like so much has happened in this past year.
It's unbelievable that it's only been 1 year.
Yes, agreed.
So, what are the highlights? What has happened?
Yeah, I know. I was reflecting on when we recorded that episode, and I think that it was at the start of COVID.
Yeah, because
Like,
Jenna was not we usually recorded in my house, and she was also on Zoom.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Exactly. Which is crazy to think that we are still in this situation a year later, although more vaccinations and such, which is exciting,
it
but
is
kind of
very.
crazy. I did not think that we would be in this at this point. But yeah, so much has happened. I think just like world event wise, so much has been happening in the past year with COVID, with like the events of George Floyd that happened at the end of May, the protests, BLM protests of June,
Yeah.
the election, and Asian hate, and all these different events that have been happening.
Yeah,
It's been like a very heavy year.
for
And
sure.
it's a weird year to like have all these heavy things happen and to be told to social distance. Um,
I know, like the timing, not that there's ever a good time for any of that, but just kind of thinking about how we were so separated in the midst of all this time we needed to be together is really, that has been so difficult.
yeah, yeah, it's like crazy. And I think that because of that, it's like we've seen so much on Instagram and the news and social media that has just been like, it's such a weird way. Like I remember watching the George Floyd events on my phone at night in my like bed and just like not being with people and just feeling so weird about that. And yeah, I think that so much has happened. And therefore, like work has also been different this year. I
Yeah.
think like a really big year of growth in different ways. I think of like some of the macro things that have happened as far as growth, like going into telehealth, thinking about like boundaries with that,
Mm-hmm.
Just learning like more about systemic racism and what to do as a provider and how to hold space for people
What has that really
who,
looked like for you? I'm so curious, like what your work has been is specifically in that space of helping others
yeah, I
and
think,
learning.
yeah, it's been a lot of learning. I think that I realized that I had so much to learn.
Yeah, me
I think
too,
that,
Molly.
yeah, I think a lot of us, like, there's so many ways that our nutrition has been like whitewashed.
Yep.
And yeah, yeah. And it's like just all these micro ways and just some like really big ways of knowing that I don't know the exact statistic, but it's something along the lines of like, I think 85 or 90% of dietitians are white. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I'll look it up. I'm
yeah.
curious.
And just like kind of understanding the reasoning behind that and how this major isn't accessible to a lot of people. It's only offered at certain universities, and you have to do a dietetic internship and now a master's. And for the internship, you used to not be able to really get loans easily for that since it wasn't a grad school program.
Yeah.
And thinking about nutrition in general is a privilege for people to really make choices that are nutritious as opposed to just having access to certain foods that aren't as nutritionally dense. So, yeah.
The statistic from Food and Nutrition magazine, it said apparently they're not going to just say straight up what percentage is white, but they say 5% Hispanic, 5% Asian, 3% Black / African American, and 2% other. So that's 85%. So it's
Yeah.
10 and 5. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah. That's
large,
like
large
crazy.
percent.
Yeah. And just like, how can you relate to people on that level? And I think that also, as like from a personal standpoint, I'm half Chinese. And it's just kind of like a personal identity journey that I've been on this past year of being a white appearing half Chinese woman and feeling like when you're half something, it's hard to fit into either um, like camp in that sense. So trying to like talking to my cousin who's also half Asian and talking to some other friends about what that's like and what that means for the work that I do and how I
Right.
can like provide space for people in that realm.
So yeah, I am so curious to hear about that experience for you. I remember speaking to one of my friends who is half Black, and I had made a comment one time about how they did not seem Black like years and years ago, and thinking I was being funny because they present more white than Black. And I realized after a lot of the things I was learning last year that like how harmful that could be to
Mm-hmm.
have kind of that split identity and then have other people telling you, oh, you look like a white person, and like all that that could entail. And just realizing like, oh my gosh, like that's not okay to say. You don't need to be commenting on that because what does that mean for that person and their own
Yeah.
struggles with their identity because of the thin white ideal and white privilege.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And it's making, I think I just got dinner with some friends yesterday and one of them pointed to um a younger, like probably a toddler who's Asian and was like, "Oh, Molly, that looks like you when you were little." But I was like, "No, not at all." Like
Yeah.
I had like this child was a lot like she was very thin and paler and I had darker skin and was had rounder features when I was little. And I was like, really nothing that made us look alike. So it was just a strange comment, but it makes you feel like othered in a way, or like you can't, I don't know, just like an unnecessary dig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was the person receptive to you kind of giving that feedback of like, oh no, actually, that's not?
I'm not sure. I don't
Okay.
know if it really sunk in. And I
Yeah.
think that I'm still learning like how to give adequate feedback, because I think that it might have come across more as like a, oh no, like not at all, blah blah blah, and like less of like
Sure.
a critique.
Sure.
But yeah, it is hard in the moment to like be able to like know how to react to those situations, especially with people who you're supposed to feel safe with.
Yeah. And that's where like the whole concept of white guilt, I not that I am like sympathetic to that, but um trying to understand what you're supposed to do when it's actually the white person's problem in society to fix, but trying to understand what you're doing wrong and gather all those things and like the right resources too. It's been an interesting process to try and figure out where to get the information from that's helpful, because not wanting to burden someone that's already struggling.
Yeah, totally. I totally think that's like such a big thing, and something that I recognize too. Just because I'm half Asian
Sure.
doesn't mean that I know what it's like
Sure.
to be Hispanic or Black or Southeast Asian. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, it's been a lot of learning. One thing that I'm proud of when I was reflecting on the growth question, is I've started I call it the Black Lives Matter book club, within the private practice that I work with.
Oh my
So
gosh. I love that.
yeah, it's been cool. It's been like a good way to have accountability of reading some of these like really heavy books during like a very heavy
Yeah.
year, but it felt very necessary. And just like I was like, there's really no other group of people who I would like to explore this with, and like the people who I work with who
Yeah.
come from different backgrounds, and we can just like, they're therapists and dietitians, and it's like just really nice to like explore some of these deeper rooted issues,
Yeah.
within the work that we do too.
I love that so much. I'm pulling up my phone because I want to make sure I'm saying the title and author correctly. But Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings. Have you had the chance to read that?
I am reading that right now. Our book club is on Monday, and that's the one
Okay.
that we selected. Yeah. Have you read that one?
Yes, I actually, my mom and I were doing a book club together before COVID. And
Yeah.
once COVID kind of started and we weren't all seeing each other, because I have a brother I'm very close with, as well. And so the three of us have been doing them, and we read that last summer. And it's hard to read text. Like it's very, very heavy and so enlightening. Like, holy
Yes.
moly.
Yes. That's such a good way of putting it. Very heavy and like very enlightening. Like it's definitely worth any of the labor, and like it's a privilege for us to like just have to like open up this book to like somewhat get an idea of what's going on in most people's lives.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's been a big help to like have this space to learn, and to like have these books that like kind of guide you through the different nuances, that we don't learn. I think the best one that I read, and this one was actually outside of the book club, but I read Cast.
Ooh, that's on my to-do list.
Yeah, that one is very, very hard to read, but one of the acknowledgments on the back said that it should be required text for any American like
Holy.
school child or something. Yeah, student, and I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Is that
There's
Isabella Wilkerson?
Yeah, I
Isabella
think
Wilkerson?
Isabel
Is that
Wilkerson.
Isabel?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, Isabel Wilkerson.
Okay.
Yeah, and she's phenomenal. I mean, it's probably one of the best books that I've read. And it was so hard to like read because at night after like working with clients and the pandemic and everything, it's really, it is hard to want to like not just watch Legally Blonde on Netflix and like curl up. So I think
I
that
know.
it's all like a learning process, and it's not just gonna like, it's not like a 2021 thing and then we're done.
Yeah. And I think that's so important that you said that because that's been on my mind a lot. And I feel almost hesitant to like have this conversation because I don't want anyone to think that I'm being performative in any way. But I do want to talk about the things that we're like learning and growing from because I think it's really important and valuable. But I guess if people are going to draw those conclusions, like that's, whatever, that's a problem for another day. But what you were
Yeah.
saying about just having the ability to, after a long day, do that digesting is I think we need to have that stamina if we actually want to make a change because you mentioned like how easy for us that we can pick up this book and learn from it even though the text is hard because we don't have this lived experience. So like that's literally the least we could do is,
Yeah.
suffer quote unquote through a difficult text rather than numbing out with some kind of silly entertainment
Hmm.
to make sure that we are equipped to help have the conversations that need to be had and especially as healthcare providers be aware of the things that we were not aware of because of the whitewashed like healthcare system in its entirety.
Yes, totally. It is so interesting to reflect on that and to like, yeah, it's hard to like pinpoint who's at fault. Like I don't think that it's like an individual professor or like
Sure.
university that we attended, but I think that it's just, I hope that this has created some sort of shift for education. And I know that the only thing that I really know as far as education is the dietetics world, but
Sure.
I know that like at least with the colleagues that I work with, and it sounds like also like driven by the clients that we see, a lot of change is happening and hopefully will continue to do so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm hopeful.
Yeah. But it's been, yeah, I think that also just having the pandemic, it's just like it's such an interesting, like I always am like imagining with the history book that like our kids will look at, will say about
Yeah.
2016 to like 2022 or something, and just like what will this period entail and how will we like remember this and
Yeah.
what will happen in the future.
That almost like worries me because of this year is this past like 365 days is the first time that had it brought to my attention that we didn't learn things correctly like in school about what's actually happened. Like it was a very painted picture to continue the narrative and the agenda of, the collective. And I hope that as we move forward in writing history, that it can be more. I mean, I don't know how you be fully unbiased, but as much as we can so that like the stuff that's actually happened can be more reflective of what people have really gone through. Because I think there's an easy way to still really whitewash things because that was going on in the entire like Trump campaign was basically
Yes.
like acting as if none of that was actually what was going on. And so I really am hoping that when these things do get written one day, that they're actually representing positive change um,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
narrating accurately, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. Not just like sugarcoating things. It's like, and then there were protests and all
Yeah.
these things changed because in reality, not too much has changed. Um, but at least it has gotten brought to the forefront of some people's minds who are
Yeah.
willing to put in the time and do some of the reckoning that needed to happen. But yeah, I think that it's interesting to see how I think that it also like marries like health at every size and like a lot of the social justice movements, how they all intersect. And
Very
I
much
think that
so.
it's hard to like believe in HAES and believe that like the whiteness is supreme and that Asians deserve to be hated and all these different things.
Yeah.
Because it just I think the cognitive dissonance would be very strong.
Yeah. Very, very much so. Something that has really stuck out to me, just like being a dietitian and having these things brought to my attention of how whitewashed dietetics is how many times I've encouraged people to switch like from white products like white rice or white tortillas to something different. And I can almost like see myself like as a fly on the wall having these conversations, especially when I used to work at WIC with really low income people.
Yeah.
And I was being told to do this. So it's not that I don't have any like personal blame, but this is the system. They're literally like tell these people what they're eating is unhealthy, that they need to lose weight, that they need to make sure their babies aren't too fat, and you need to do all this and load their benefits card within 15 minutes and then
Yeah.
probably prick their child's finger and cause a whole scene. And also they don't speak English.
Yeah.
So you have to use your very conversational Spanish to even have these conversations, and you're telling someone not to do things that align with their culture because your view of healthy, clean eating, quote unquote, doesn't match that culturally.
Yeah, totally. I think
So
that
tone deaf.
yeah, exactly. And I went in upon like, it does sound very tone deaf, and it is exactly what we're taught in so many different settings.
Yep.
But since you and I both went to Virginia Tech, I do have to toot their horn because I do remember taking communicating with food.
Yes.
And how Heather Cox, our professor, said not to tell like to meet people where they're at with their cultures.
Yes.
And I remember like the corn products being something that a lot of people might come in and try to be like, instead of corn tortillas, use wheat, and instead of like the white rice, use brown rice, and just like there are other ways to make changes in people's diets.
Did you have to do that assignment where you were given a budget of a family of 4 from different backgrounds, and you had to cook food and plan an entire week's worth of food for them?
Yes. Yep. I had Chinese American family.
Okay. I cannot remember this is so like I was so not used to having a cultural influence in my cuisine that I couldn't even tell you now, all these years later, what it was that we prepared, but it was not food that I had ever cooked before. And that assignment has always stuck with me because it just highlighted a lot of really important things. So I agree. We can give Virginia Tech a good shout out and Heather Cox for like incorporating that stuff. And we need so much more of that. But like, I'm really glad that was part of our programming.
Yeah, it felt progressive in the sense that like now, I don't know, it's been like years, 5, 6, 7 years or something since graduating. And then like that has stuck with us is powerful. And I think that you're right. Like we just need more of that. I don't think that there was much of that at all during my dietetic internship. So it felt like almost a step backwards.
Yeah. And then the second you get out of a really low income population, like as a practitioner, like once I stepped outside of WIC, it was like, even though I had that experience, it was like my brain shifted to, oh, well, now you have access to these people who have money and they want to like know about all these fancy products. And it became hard to have conversations about someone that had a budget. And it was just wild how quickly that shift happened because I was trying to keep up with the demand of what was expected, again, from work environment and from the people coming to see me and what they wanted out of a dietitian.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. That's really cool that you had the WIC experience for longer than my internship of like 1 week at WIC. Because I think that it is so enlightening to see like this program, Women, Infants, and Children, that is like how our government decided to have a budget for, is also has so not as supportive and as helpful as it might appear to be once you like are in it, as you know better than I do.
Yeah. And I think like that was the last time I worked there was 5 years ago now. And so I feel like I'm a completely different dietitian in person, even in that amount of time. But I think I wasn't able to even like appreciate the issues there and where I could be actually helpful because I was fresh out of school with these ideas about healthy eating and all the weight bias. And I think going back into WIC, which I don't know if I could handle, would be a completely different experience as far as having the compassion for people. Because another thing that I grew up being like, I don't even know where it really came from because I'm not from like a wealthy family at all, but just this idea of like it's your decision whether you make money and excel in life or not, and like these people are just abusing the system. And that was very much like the ideas that I had always been fed. And like I said, I'm not even 100% sure where, because I don't even think that was directly my parents, but just society, I guess. The corners of society I was in. And I think I lacked a lot of compassion because it felt like a frustrating process. And now I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, sure, there are always going to be people that abuse things, but there were people that were really in need. And I wish that I could do it differently, like have conversations differently with them to be impactful and like encouraging, rather than the things that I thought I needed to say to them about making sure they didn't gain too much weight during their pregnancy and, don't feed your baby too much. Like,
I know. And it's just it's tough, like to be that new in a profession, any profession, like from accounting to being like a chef or something. Like we will all have those like cringy times. And I think that like for you and me being only like a couple years apart, it's also like really cool that we are like learning that this early on in our career, because
oh my gosh,
the way that dietetics has progressed, like I kind of view it as like traditional dietetics, like kind of like the meal plan and calorie counting and diets, and then like more progressive dietetics, which is like HAES and intuitive eating and more social justice minded. And I think that like how lucky are we to have some people who have like set the stage for this to be the case at this point. And obviously there's a lot of growth that needs to happen in this profession, but thank goodness, because I think that I would have had so many more cringy moments if I was not exposed to like podcasts like this or books or had like role models on Instagram to follow and listen to and learn from.
I really like thank Rebecca Scritchfield and Christy Harrison a ton because they're two of the first people that I was exposed to in like getting into this work. And you're right, they had been in this career longer than us, so that's such a good reflection to be like, thankfully the cringy stuff was abbreviated.
Totally.
So we kind of got into the what did you call it? What kind of dietetics?
Oh, progressive.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. No, I know. I like remember the first time I listened to Julie Duffy Dillon's Love Food podcast and how that like totally shifted my perspective in dietetics and nutrition personally and professionally. And like the people who came before her, like Lindo Bacon and Evelyn Tribbley and Elise Reich and like, there's so many other people,
Yeah.
Deb Burgard, and
Yeah.
HAES World, who have done so much work to set the stage for the
For
growth that has
decades.
happened.
Like
Yeah.
they've been working for decades on this. And it just
Yes.
like within the past probably would you say 1 to 2 years really has become well known?
Yeah, I agree. And I don't even think like, I think that, yeah, we'll see even more growth with like intuitive eating and HAES
Yeah.
world stuff like in the next 5 to 10 years. It still shocks me sometimes when I talk to people outside of the dietetics world. I'm like, oh, have you heard of intuitive eating? They're like, no. I'm like, really? It's been all the
Yeah.
rage for the past like 3 to 5 years. And then, yeah, but like, of course, I'm like so siloed in this world.
I know. It's hard to like this is so silly, but like it's hard to remember what it's like to not know what you know.
Yes.
And I had a conversation not that long ago with someone um, about how weight doesn't determine health. And when they asked me, I like my brain for a second was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean? You don't know about this? Okay, well, I hope you have an hour because
Yeah.
I'm about to tell you.
I know. It is like really hard to remember. And it's like, I don't know, it's really like cool to be in a position where you know more, and you can like kind of mentor somebody or
Mhm.
like plant a seed too.
Yeah.
Because I think that, yeah, like we only know what we know. So like
Yep.
spreading the word is so important. And it's something that I feel like both of us are passionate about. Like I think that's why like you feel energized by this podcast space and why
Yeah.
like I don't know, so many of my like bar conversations are about like intuitive eating and stuff, or like I don't know, just like it seeps
Yeah.
into like our lives in different ways. And once you like get a taste of it, you want other people to experience that.
Yeah. And it's so like like the passion of it, it just like really engulfs you and it is very energizing. Like I love getting into conversations about this, especially when it's someone that is trying to learn, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is so great that you even care. Like I had a
Yeah.
conversation recently with my dad, and he was like listening to all these things that I've been learning about treating eating disorders, and he just is so mind blown by it. And he was repeating some things that he had heard from Fit Feel Free because he's like working his way through listening to that.
Oh,
And
that's
it
awesome.
just was so cool to hear because, you know, different generation, like raised completely differently with different understanding of health, like and all these different things. And for him to even take the time to care about seeing,
Yeah.
oh, maybe, my daughter is on to something, like that's so cool to be able to make an impact, even just like with family from this stuff. Like I do just love talking about it all the time, clearly.
Yeah.
Podcast, but
No, that's awesome. I think that you're right. Like one, that's awesome that your dad is like this stuff is like sinking in and he's like going through the podcast episodes and like kind of hearing like this. I'm sure it's like a totally different perspective than like
yeah.
what we went into dietetics for. Like I
Oh
think my
yeah.
dad has been like pretty like rocked his boat of like where I am now versus like my beliefs about nutrition and how like micro I thought about nutrition with like calorie counting and weighing food and all these
Mhm.
different disordered behaviors that I thought was like in the name of health,
Yeah.
and how that's shifted. So
My
yeah.
family too, because I used to like throw tantrums when there wasn't like enough vegetables at family functions and there were too
Yeah.
many quote unquote unhealthy foods. I was like, it got to the point where they would ask me, are these foods okay for you to eat for
Wow.
years because they were so used to, and I didn't even know I had been doing it, but just reacting so negatively to just barbecue foods because I was
Yeah.
ordered and I had these different ideas about what needed to be going on. And so it is nice to kind of be able to come full circle and help them be like, yeah, like I don't think like that anymore because now I know all this and I'm better and we're going to get better as a society, hopefully.
Yeah. And cool to like recognize for like both of us, and I think a lot of other people too, that like that is disordered because like we didn't think that it was. Like, you're just
Nope.
going, you're like, oh, this is healthy. Like, I'm on this health kick. Like, I read this article and like, I don't know. Like, it's just like, yeah, you're like doing these things and it just feels nonchalant until it comes to a point where you're like, whoa, this is like interfering with my life in a way that I didn't expect it to.
Yeah.
It's interfering with social events in a way that like I don't want to have that reputation of being the one who's like criticizing dishes for not having enough vegetables or
Yep. When you're having mental breakdowns because you ate cheese fries and a steak and cheese sandwich, and then you're like,
yeah,
wait a second, what just happened?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Ugh.
It's hard to like notice those things when you're stuck
And
in it.
yeah, very much so. Molly, I have to tell you this. When we interviewed together last time, I remember that we had asked you, like, would you talk about some of your like disordered eating stuff and like your own personal journey? And you had shared that you didn't want to center that because of being thin and just like not needing to perpetuate that. And I didn't really fully understand at the time like what you were getting at because I was still very much on that fence of like annoyed by certain healthcare professionals being like it's not helpful for thinner bodies to like talk all the time about their insecurities and like show their stomach rolls and like those kinds of things
Yeah.
that are kind of like what I consider like entry level into healing work and things you're interested in, like very entry
Yeah.
level. And I've just been so like curious about that whole concept. And I think that I've evolved a lot in that way as making sure that I still value my voice in this profession, but not centering the thin white ideal. And I just wanted you to know that that small comment that you said actually had a really big impact on like the trajectory of my growth as a professional. And you were a
Wow.
really big part of that.
Thanks, Dani. I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, I do remember like saying something along those lines. And it's something that I have like a very similar experience to you. I know when I was helping with the Weight Inclusive Nutrition Dietetics Conference, um, and I was talking to my friend Lauren Newman,
Mhm.
and she said something similar about like not wanting to talk too much about like her history of eating because she didn't want to center like herself and her body in this space where mostly when people think of eating disorders, they think of like young, white,
Yes.
thin women,
Yes.
and how we need to like raise up the like like center the voices of different people because I think that we're missing so many like people in the treatment setting because they're not fitting the mold of what it looks like to have an eating disorder.
Hmm.
And it's such like it's an interesting concept because it seems so like small, but I think that it does have this big impact on people because it's, as we know, it's so important to like see leaders that look like you and to be exposed to people who come from the same background as you.
Yeah.
And when we miss that mark, it can have this like larger ripple effect than what we think.
Hmm. And it's a hard pill to swallow because you're like, oh, like I don't matter. And then that's where it's like, holy shit, like that's the exact problem is that you feel threatened by other people's voices being
Yes.
heard, maybe even louder than yours. So that didn't take long for my brain to be like, oh, okay, like I get why that's an issue. It's just such a sadly, that's it is centered, so that's what you think it's helpful when you start. And I'm not saying that it's wrong for people to share their lived experiences,
Yeah.
but I just really respected you being like, hey, I want to talk but not about just myself in this way. And I think that's just been it's important for people to hear, and that's just been very powerful for
Yeah.
myself moving forward because there's a lot more other people need to say that have different experiences that if we're going to break down systemic racism and have a better world for our future, that has to stop. And it's Yeah, that's exactly like you said. It sounds really small, but it is. It has a big ripple effect. You're totally right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that yeah, I think that it is a hard pill to swallow because it's kind of, it feels almost invalidating. I think that it is interesting because um like we all do have our food journeys. We all have
Hmm.
like the ways in which we grew up eating, and it is really powerful and so personal and like important to who we are. And yeah, it is really important to like bring people on who have different lived experiences just so that we're not hearing the same like
Right.
story over and over again.
Yeah.
And yeah.
It's funny because going to higher level of care, you don't like self-disclose any of that stuff. I mean, there's probably rare instances where it would be helpful, but generally speaking, it's not really something that would be appropriate to ever like self-disclose your own struggles, which I did not always, but a lot more frequently in outpatient because
Yeah.
a lot of those people were more at a level where that was appropriate. So it was funny timing, honestly, because I start to learn about these things and question like where I want to be like making my voice heard and what I want my voice to be saying. And then I go to a job where it's like no one actually, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure people know about my podcast. I'm sure people find you online, but like you don't need to talk about that stuff to help someone get better. And I think that's not what my understanding of being a dietitian was in the first place, because it's very much, this is how I am, this is how you need to be. And that transitioned into my like helping people heal relationship with food. Oh, well, I went through this. I understand healing. This is how you're going to heal. But yeah, I've never been in a larger body, even though my body has shifted. It's never been a larger body. And that
Yes.
you can't like argue that that's a different experience.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, totally. That is an interesting, like, it's almost like a funny, like coming of age movie that just like halt because like you're not, then that's like, oh, you actually can't like fully share exactly what happened in this movie because
Yeah.
you're like not at a higher level of care where it's not appropriate anymore.
Yeah.
That
And
is
so
interesting. Yeah.
I don't even care that much. Like, of course, it comes up in conversation related to this and when I'm getting to know people. But I just am like, yeah, it's not that hard to not center yourself once you start it. It's
Yeah.
not that hard.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. And I just think that, yeah, as like we grow as professionals, I think that, yeah, disclosure has like a time and a place, but you can tell. I mean, I've had like a bunch of different therapists in my life, and I now, since I've had multiple different therapists, I can like reflect and like kind of feel what felt right to me. And
Yeah.
when there was too much sharing, it felt like this wasn't like my therapy session anymore. Um, and we can't really like fully, like, that's actually like your experience wasn't really that helpful to share because it was like a totally different story.
Yeah.
And like keeping that in mind with clients, since I'm in like an outpatient setting too.
Hmm.
We all have different lived experiences and come from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that I hope is being more understood of like taking a second to actually think about that. Because there's a saying like all kinds of sayings, but like the one of like, you don't know what it's like until you walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And sure, you can throw things like that around, but are we actually taking the time to consider that what you know isn't everything? So I am so glad to be being challenged in this way to grow as a person because like you said, cringy moments, for
Yeah.
sure. But like, thank God I'm moving past that. And I can even say it's cringy because I'm so glad I'm not continuing to behave that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There is so much growth. It's kind of crazy to think about like what things I've done this week that I'm going to look back on and be
Yeah.
like cringe.
Yeah.
Um, like just, yeah, especially in like work, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I like did that activity with a client. Like now I understand that that was like rooted in, I don't know, something like problematic or something, but
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, we're doing the best we can with what we got. And just, I think that that's been like a big learning thing for me this year has been like, I've always been kind of like go, 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 go. And I've been very jealous of people who seem content. Um,
Mm.
because I'm like, oh, I just like I knew that I wanted to be in private practice and I want to eventually open up my own private practice, but I really do love where I am right now. And that took like I I it's been like a really nice realization because I always kind of thought like, oh, I'd be in private, like somebody else's practice for
Mhm.
like 2 years, 3 years or so. But like it's cool to, I don't know like a time limit anymore. And it's nice to like just sit in this like knowing that I feel content and that I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but just like this feel like this growth that's happened and like
Yeah.
it's that's been a big shift for me.
Yeah,
Has
like
just been
basically you don't have to be jumping onto the next thing immediately. You're allowed to like exist peacefully where you're at today.
yeah, exactly. And like I don't have to read all the books all at one time. I mean, of course I like bought them and they're just like on the bookshelf behind me, but I don't need to like cram this info because that's not even how I like learn best. Like it
Yeah.
has to be like a slow drip for me because I like take a while to process things. And if I like force things down, it's just I won't retain. So I think that it's just felt like this year has just been like kind of a big like wake up call to like realign with like my values of like why do I
Hmm.
do this work and taking off some of the pressure of like I need to be like the best provider because like for my clients and all these things and I do want to be the best provider and I need to recognize that like being the best provider sometimes means taking a step back.
Yeah. That's so important. What you just said about like cramming information reminded me of how many things I know I was taught in school that I don't remember because I didn't have time to actually ingest it because it
Yes.
was happening so rapid fire
Yep.
and it feels like that's what we're supposed to do. And to take things at a slow pace feels inherently wrong, but it's
Yes.
so much more effective as long as you don't like well, I don't want to say not give up because I understand sometimes there's like intentional reasons you need to take a pause from something or it's not you're not ready for that. But like if you can keep it going just at your own pace, it can be so much more rewarding and like helpful than shoving it all into this small time because you feel like you just need to know everything right this second.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, biochemistry, I don't think I can name one thing. Metabolic nutrition, I don't know. Remember like maybe three things from that. It's like crazy how much when you just like cram for something. I mean, they
Yeah.
always say that, but like it felt like I could figure out the ways to like check off the boxes without like really sitting with the information and like applying it. And
Yeah.
that is my biggest regret of college and of like
Yeah.
learning in general.
And if we like actually want to make a change with learning about systemic oppression, we need to take it in the way that is going to be like actually helpful to learn,
Yeah,
which I
totally.
think is important for people to reflect because it seemed like it is this way. Some people were involved because it was what was relevant for I mean it's still not over, but like the 2020 period around George Floyd, like, oh, let me change my Instagram square to
Yeah.
black, let me like do this stuff. And then where are you a year later? Like, are you still doing that work? Because we need to keep it going. Even if we haven't learned everything yet, we need to keep moving forward so that everyone can move forward.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. And saying these things out loud is like so different from me than like sometimes my internal voice that's just like, oh, Molly, like you're just a slow reader. And like if you really cared, you would be doing X volunteering while
Yeah.
like going to this event and like all these different things. And there's always like do more, do more, do more.
Yeah.
And it's important. And it's important to like recognize that the pace doesn't have to be 100 miles per hour all the time.
Yeah, I had a reflection on that literally a week ago. I was walking the dog with my husband Matt, and I was like just annoyed because hearing a lot of the recent tragedies that have happened with police violence, and just some really like comments I've seen from people that I'm like, how are we a year past what to me seemed like we weren't couldn't go back from this, and we're still not understanding. And I for some reason felt inclined to say out loud to him, I was like, this is the only thing like I've even done in the past year to like learn. And I start like rattling this list off, and then I was like, I basically told myself to shut up because I was like, who are you competing with? I was like, why are you even having this conversation? And Matt's used to this. Like, I talk a lot, and he's just kind of like, yeah, okay. Like, he's not concerned that I didn't do enough. And I'm just like, I don't know where I'm getting with this concept of like, what did I think I needed to single-handedly change the world? Because that wasn't going to happen, and it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think we are very hard on ourselves, um, and
Yeah.
have to feel like we have to be this like new and improved version tomorrow. And it's like when we look back, it's like, yeah, it's going to take time. But the important thing is that you keep going, I think, anyway.
Exactly. Yes. No, I totally agree. Yeah, it is like this, there's a lot of like pressure like to one, perform, then two, to take action, and then
Yeah.
three, to like spread the good word. And it's like where, and like it feels like judgment from others and judgment from
Mhm.
ourselves. But I think that yeah, it's important, just like anything that we like tell our clients, like these things take time. It's not
Yeah.
something that like we can humanly learn overnight. And it's important to do the work. Like it is important to do recovery and to do the food exposures and to do
Yeah, exactly.
um, all these different like challenges. And like it's a journey. Building like when you're in recovery from an eating disorder, building the team is so important. Being all aligned against like the greater evil, which is the eating disorder, as opposed to being angry at each other with
Yeah.
whether parents and the patient or the physician or the therapist or the dietitian or the psychiatrist, like whoever is on the team. And it's the same with like the work that we do, like being surrounded by people who are learning and are interested in the things that we're learning, so that
Mhm.
it feels validating and helpful. And like, yeah, it's like creating our own team that I think is just like really important for people. And I think that that's like building a team doesn't have to be like physically being in a room with people and like having a book club, but like
Yeah.
following people on Instagram who have a similar like like or like a role model, like somebody that you like
Mhm.
really appreciate their thoughts, and somebody that you want to learn from. Podcasts that are like new and sound intriguing, like there are
Mhm.
ways to expand um, that don't have to be like through a book or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah. I think this year has just been crazy. I'm like, don't even know. I think that it's been a big year for a lot of people. And I have like so much like sympathy or empathy with the different people who have been like affected by this pandemic and
Yeah.
the events that have taken place in the US and around the world, and like the clients that we see where eating disorders have been increasing. According to one person at a treatment center who I talked to, like 45% from where they were last year and like this
Yeah.
winter.
The
Yeah.
waiting lists are pretty bad just from my like direct job experience. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, mental health is not it's it's not in a good place because people are struggling, but I think there's more people trying to get help, which is
Yeah.
why it's harder to get care, I guess, which is a problem. But I totally like I think that's just all over the place. Like people
Yeah.
need access to that support.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, yeah, it's really hard to like have these conversations. And like, if you have like multiple patients that you're working with or like clients that I'm working with, and then you like close your laptop or you like leave the office and then you go out into the world and then you hear these other events and then you like go and meet up with a friend and it's just like, ooh, it's like you're like, it's so much to take on too.
Yeah. How have
That,
you been? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
yeah, no.
What has your self-care been like? How have you been trying to slow down and kind of what you've been hinting at of trying to kind of live more in the moment and not take too much on? What have you been doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I have been talking about even this morning when I met with my therapist. So an ongoing conversation that I'm not quite handling in the best way at this point. But
Okay.
I think what has been helpful is to talk about it with people and like kind of hear what they do and like especially friends who are really good at reflecting what you're saying back to you.
Yeah.
Or like a therapist, like she was just like, okay, you said that you want to make sure that you can sometimes go to happy hour with friends. So like write that down. And then like write down that sometimes you want to like go on a walk in between clients or like be able to go to a doctor's appointment. Like write that down because that's important. We were trying to like build my ideal schedule.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with like self-care and just like feeling overwhelmed by that task. I was like, I don't even know how to approach this, but that's been very much on my mind, especially this morning when we were talking about that. I also think that this year, growth self-care wise has been interesting because I've never been in a long-term relationship before. And it's given me like a new perspective of kind of having this like entrepreneurial spirit and like being like, oh, I want to do this and take on the world and all these different things. And not that that's like changed from like having a partner,
Sure.
but like it having a partner really like susses out some of like what is important in life. And like it's not making like X amount of dollars in a
Yeah.
year really isn't like that important if like there's no time to like spend with your partner or with your friends or with your family.
Yeah.
Like it can be, there's so much more to life. And I think that that's been a helpful like self-care moment. Has just been dating somebody who like I like and who I want to spend time with. And realizing that like, yeah, I was good at self-care when it was like just me, but there's like this added person in my life who I value and who I want to like spend time with. And what does that look like? Which is different. So yeah, haven't nailed anything. I do think from last year when we talked, I've like gotten more of my ducks in a row, but there's still like multiple ducks who are kind of scattered around and not sure where they are.
I love that you're like working on those things though in therapy and trying to figure out your priorities and having that. That's awesome. I'm always just so curious, like what people are working on for themselves. Cause like you said, it's helpful to hear what other people are doing to
Yeah.
stay afloat.
Yeah. I mean, like the end of last week, I took off 2 days at the suggestion of my supervisor, Anik, and then also my therapist, because a lot's happened like within my family unit too. And although I have taken off time like this year, and I'm not one to really like be hard on myself for taking off time, and I was able to like go skiing and see some like people in my life who I haven't seen in a while after getting vaccinated and such. That was all great. And it was like really nice this past Thursday, Friday to like not plan anything and just like be at home, watch Netflix, hang out, and just like remember that like being like alone is like really nice at some points. And like just there were so many like loose ends and things I just was like, oh, I have no time to do this. And not that I had to complete it on those days, but just like that the opportunity for me to like wash a dish running in between clients and stuffing my face like with food so that I wasn't like ravenous by 5 p.m. Like,
Yeah.
those things were important as reminders. So I think now it's just like trying to get myself to a point where I can take those days, but they're not like, I need these days.
Yeah. I guess that's burnout prevention, right?
Yes.
Which is
Yeah.
an ever evolving process.
Yeah, it really is. Like, no matter how many articles you read, it's like a journey in itself.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that we got to catch up. This has been so nice to talk to you because we don't get to talk that often. So this is just enjoyable, but also I always value what you have to say and share.
Thanks, Dani.
Yeah.
You too. I was so ecstatic that you reached out to me again, and it means a lot. And I know that I shared this before, but one of my closest, dearest friends is a fan of the pod, and was a fan of like you as a host of the pod. So it's, and like some of my other friends too. So it's like really cool to have been invited back. And I'm honored to have been able to talk to you over this past hour or so.
Yeah, it's been really great. Thank you for coming back. Any last words of advice you want to give to people as we wrap up today? Anything else on your mind?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think that we covered a bunch of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I think with growth comes like being gentle with ourselves in whatever way that means to us, whether it's like, I don't know, that's like the word that comes to mind when thinking about everything that we talked about with the like systemic oppression and racism and these heavy topics and eating disorders and COVID and setting boundaries and all these like vulnerable things that are happening and making us be outside of our like normal selves. And I just think that it's important to like remain gentle and open to things.
Yes, I love that. I think we all need to hear that on a regular basis. Yeah,
I will be playing this end of the podcast back in my ears so I can remember these things that I say too.
Yes, that's really great. Like reflection of these were your words, Molly. You have to obey them.
I know, exactly. Now I'll do it.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, thank you again, and I look forward to talking with you soon.
You too, Dani. Thank you.